Thanks, everybody. So again, my name is Chaney, and I'm a cartographer and field checker with Benchmark, and excited to be kicking off what is always my favorite session at NACIS. So it's great to be a part of it this year and get to talk about one of my favorite projects that I've gotten to work on at Benchmark, which again is the second edition of our Yellowstone and Grand Teton National Parks Atlas. But before we get into all of the cool new stuff that I would like to talk about, I think it's worthwhile to spend a little time to give some context for this particular book and its unique place in the Benchmark product line. So let's go back in time to 2014. That's when the first edition came out. And back then we called it the Greater Yellowstone and Grand Teton Recreation Atlas and Guide. It's a bit of a mouthful, but there's really no way around it. Now, this was something of a spin-off product built on the heels of the University of Oregon Infographics Lab's Atlas of Yellowstone. If you have never taken a look at that book, I cannot encourage you strongly enough to go check it out. It's an incredible resource. It's beautiful. They released the second edition a few years ago. You'll also notice a familiar name on the front cover. Our distinguished moderator has been a part of that project since its beginning. It's a great book. It's super fun. Check it out if you've never seen it before. It's worthy of the spectacular landscapes and the history that it details. Allen Cartography, which is a previous cartographic firm from which Benchmark Maps was born, they produced the reference maps for the first edition Atlas of Yellowstone at two different scales covering both of the parks. And eventually Benchmark used those reference maps as the starting point for our own Yellowstone and Grand Teton Atlas, restyling them to match the Benchmark look and feel and forming the core of the first edition. So, that first edition, and I mean even the second edition, the Yellowstone book occupies kind of an odd place in the Benchmark Maps lineup. If you're not familiar with our stuff, this is pretty much the flagship line. These are our atlases, and as you'll see, most of them are states or provinces, like big regions. And then down in the bottom corner, there's the Yellowstone and Grand Teton Atlas. So first of all, it's just a different size. It's a smaller book. It's 8.5 by 11 when it's closed. And on top of that, it covers a smaller area than any of the other books. This isn't Texas or British Columbia, it's Yellowstone and Grand Teton. And it's duplicating the coverage of other books as well. Because of where these parks sit, in the northwest corner of Wyoming, we are spilling into parts of Idaho and Montana and Wyoming. And on top of all of that, even, the first edition was the Greater Yellowstone Atlas. It wasn't just the parks, it was spilling deeper into those areas. That was the extent of the coverage for the first edition. So all of that probably made it maybe harder than it should have been or could have been for some people to understand exactly what this book was about. It's easy when you see like the Colorado book on the shelf. It's Colorado, but for some people, maybe Greater Yellowstone is a more difficult concept or a more foreign concept. So the first edition had a bit of a longer lifespan than we anticipated. It was about 10 years. But the plus side of that was that gave us 10 years to think about what we could do when the second edition rolled around, how we could improve it. We had 10 years of new ideas, we had 10 years of new data sources to incorporate, 10 years of edits from field checks like this one where we're out on the ground checking things out for ourselves. There's plenty to incorporate, plenty to update. So what have we changed with the second edition? Well, it starts, of course, on the cover. So first edition was Greater Yellowstone and Grand Teton. The Greater is gone, and we are just focusing on Yellowstone and Grand Teton National Parks, trying to hone it in. This is what we're talking about. This is what this book covers. But the differences, of course, go deeper than the front covers. Now, our atlases, for those of you who may be unfamiliar, all have the same basic structure. At the beginning, there are regional maps, which cover the focal area and the surrounding areas to give you a sense, the context of the geographic setting, see where you are, how you get in there. There's recreation guides and maps, which are at an intermediate scale, and as you can see on the right, have lots of detailed listings for points of interest and public lands to help you plan your trip. This is a good trip planning resource. Then we have landscape maps, which are showing the entirety of the focal area in the greatest detail for detailed planning or for navigation when you're actually out in the field. And then, of course, at the end, there's an index to help you find what you're looking for. For the second edition, the regional maps, they didn't change at all. We made some minor updates, but basically they stayed the same. The recreation guides, though, they got a major makeover, and so that's what we'll talk about here first. That was some of the most fun stuff that we got to work on. So, first edition, this was the coverage of the recreation maps. They spanned from Butte in the top left to Billings in the top right, down to Pocatello, Idaho in the bottom left, and Lander, Wyoming in the bottom right, well beyond the park boundaries. Second edition, we have zoomed in much closer to the parks. We are spilling over a little bit to the west, out towards Red Lodge and towards Cody, but again, we're trying to hew really close to the park boundaries. This reframing allowed us to add a lot more detail to these maps, like points of interest and trails, turning them into a more effective trip planning tool for adventures in these parks. On the left is the first edition, and you can see that you have almost all of Yellowstone National Park is on that map, and the same goes for Grand Teton down in the bottom. And if you look on the right side, the second edition, now Grand Teton goes from like an eighth of the page to almost the entire page. You basically have a whole park map just on one page there, just to give a sense of what this rescaling allowed us to do. Much more detail in the landscape, much more detail in the road networks, and points of interest as well. More importantly for me and my day-to-day work, it meant that we had 5 pages that were, or 5-page pairs that were freed up, and that we got to do new stuff with. And that was the most fun for me. So the first 3 of those page pairs we took and dedicated to what we called the village maps. These focused on the 3 highest traffic areas in Yellowstone, so Mammoth Hot Springs, Canyon Village, and Old Faithful. As I've already said, like this atlas is already at such a different scale. It's much more zoomed in. It's a closer look at a landscape than what we usually do in our atlases. And now with these maps, we're really zooming in pretty tight. These are 1 to 16,000, 1 to 12,000 scale maps. Usually we're working somewhere in the 1 to 200,000 range. And so with these village maps, we got to do stuff that we don't usually get to do in our atlases, like label individual geysers or do 50-foot contours and building footprints, like just fun, different approaches that we got to take in a benchmark atlas that we don't usually get to concern ourselves with. For Old Faithful and for Mammoth Hot Springs as well, you might see those brown lines snaking out in the middle of the thermal areas. We came up with a boardwalk symbol because at this scale we could really differentiate between like what's just a regular trail and what's a boardwalk. If you've been to Yellowstone, you've walked out on those, like it's a very different trail. It's part of the experience. It's part of being in those geyser basins, and having the opportunity to showcase that in a different way on the map was a really fun opportunity. So new things that we got to play around with in these. But hey, this is the terrain mapping session. Let's stop talking about boardwalks. Let's talk about terrain. So the shaded relief in our atlases is generally not too dramatic. I mean, we would love it to go crazy and just show these landscapes off, but we have all this recreation and road information that we're overlaying on top. You have to find a balance. But here in these village maps, because of the scale, we were able to build these shaded reliefs with some different components and do some stuff that we don't usually get to do. So here is the Canyon Village area and the upper reaches of the Grand Canyon of the Yellowstone, and we'll use this as kind of an example to see how this all comes together. So we used a lot of different components in building these. My first recommendation was for you to check out the Infographics Lab and their Atlas of Yellowstone. My second recommendation is if you haven't played with Edward, play with Edward, because it's super fun, and that's where a lot of this shaded relief components came from. We did analytical shading is in there to just kind of get the basic structure of the landscape. There's a manual shading that's in there as well to get some of those bigger shadows, give you a little more of the grandeur perhaps. There's a texture shading in there as well to help pull out, especially in the Grand Canyon of the Yellowstone, all of those like rocky fins and just the really intricate nature of the canyon walls. There is land cover in these as well, and at this scale, we could just pull the land cover from aerial imagery instead of using some other data source where it might be a little coarser with the pixelation. You could just get some nape imagery and just select where the trees are. And that gives it a much more realistic shape and feel. You could pull some texture from the tree canopy itself, and you combine all of that together, and that gives us our shading, and then we throw all of the information on top of it to hopefully have a map that is useful and beautiful to look at as you're on the ground and exploring these places on your trip. These maps also needed new dedicated guides, which let us really get into the specifics with the trails and the features that we're calling out. And there's plenty of space to kind of get creative with the interpretive side of the writing. Usually we're a little more limited. We're just kind of getting sentence fragments in, or a couple of sentences, little bullet points about things. But here we could wax a little more poetically in certain situations and give these spots their due. And there was also room for photos as well, which was fun, a good way to incorporate more of the field checks, because a lot of the pictures that we put in here are pictures from the field checks. When we're out there, we're obviously taking pictures too, because can't not take pictures. So there's a fun way to incorporate that aspect into these books as well. So those are the village maps. That was 3 of the 5 available page pairs. There were 2 more that were up for grabs, and we dedicated those to winter recreation. 1 map and 1 guide for each park. We were into this idea because we'd just done a similar treatment for the New England Atlas, which we released earlier this year as well. And in that case, we were showing annual snowfall and ski resort locations on a pretty small scale map covering most of the region. But here, again, it's a different scale. We're more zoomed in. We have more information to convey. And so we found some average annual snowfall data from NOAA, and we're able to drape that over some existing base maps, give it a nice cooler color palette, a little bit of more of a wintry feel. And I think that on its own is it's a really interesting visualization of the snow in these parks. It's not a huge surprise to see the tops of the Tetons or that bright white, over 500 inches of snow every year, which is a lot. And it's also not a surprise up in Yellowstone if you see this finger of blue that's dipping down into the park from Montana, following the one road that's open into the interior of the park in the winter. That's the lowest snow area. And showing what roads are open and what's closed, what turns into like a over snow route for snowmobiles or cross-country skiers. That was the main goal of these maps. And also showcasing what facilities are open, because so much of it closes down. But there's still stuff to do. There's still plenty of people who go there. And it's such a different visitor experience in the winter. So figuring out a way to convey that information and also give it its own guide for each park, that was a fun project as well. So with the recreation section updated, then we were able to move on to the landscape maps, which again, that's the kind of the, at least in my mind, it's kind of the core of the book. This is 36 pages of maps. They're all 1 to 100,000 scale, and they cover both of the parks in the greatest amount of detail. It's a great scale for these parks. It lets us get just about every bit of information we'd want to put on these maps, and there's still a little breathing room. It's not, I don't think it's too overcrowded. If you look at the landscape maps from the first edition, it was clear that there's room to grow, and you could still make it a little more information rich, get some more stuff in there for planning and navigation purposes. So this is the first edition, and then we fade into the same area from the second edition. You can see there's a lot of things that we were able to add in there without overcomplicating or overcluttering the map. So let's talk about some of the stuff that got added in. The first thing that came to my mind when we were brainstorming what to add was the thermal areas. My third recommendation from this talk is go check out Natural Atlas if you've never seen them before. It's a web platform and there's a mobile app. Beautiful digital maps, great for navigating. I use it for hiking and stuff, backpacking, all sorts of fun things. But on their platform, they showed thermal areas. That was really the first time that I'd seen that displayed, and I wanted to see if there was a way that we could replicate that in our map. So you see all of these, like the redder type and these kind of blotchy, rusty red splotches all over the landscape. Those are the rough extents of the thermal areas from a Park Service data set that we were able to find. And I think seeing all of that splayed out across the maps of Yellowstone really gives you a better appreciation for the scope and the scale of the supervolcano that is driving that whole landscape. I mean, if you've been to the park, you know you drive along the roads, you see tons of thermal areas along the roads. But there's even more out in the backcountry. Some of it's along trails, some of it is not along trails. And with these maps now, you can really see, like, gosh, there's a lot going on out there in this vast Yellowstone backcountry. With the backcountry in mind, we also added in backcountry campsites and camping zones throughout the park. We're not really expecting anyone to take this backpacking, but I guess you could. I mean, it would fit in a backpack. But it's more of a planning resource and maybe an inspirational resource. Maybe you're driving on the park roads with your family or your friends, and you see, oh, there's some campsites back there. That'd be cool. And you come back the next time and check that out. We also added vault toilets because Yellowstone is a big park and the visitor centers are far away, and maybe that's helpful information for you on your trip. We added more wayside exhibits. We added bear management areas where there's seasonal closures, just all of this stuff. There was space for the map to hold it, to get richer and more informative, and it was fun to fit all of that stuff in and bring the maps forward into the second edition. For the terrain on the landscape maps, there was not as much of a shift. We made some subtle adjustments, but mainly it was updating the land cover because our land cover was now over a decade out of date. And we also made the contour lines more prominent than they were in the first edition, just to really draw out the shape of the landscape, help you appreciate the relief, the steepness of some of these mountain slopes, the shape of the plateaus, just to see how sharp and steep some of these peaks rise. So again, it's the terrain session. Let's just enjoy some terrain. Let's take a brief tour of some of my favorite spots in these parks. This is Jenny Lake and Cascade Canyon and the Paintbrush Canyon in Grand Teton National Park. And then we've got Icebox Canyon heading up towards the northeast entrance of Yellowstone, up to Silvergate and Cook City, Montana. Those mountains are just spectacular up there. And then here's the Firehole River flowing through the Midway and the lower geyser basins on like the central western side of Yellowstone. Never get tired of looking at these places. Now, all those additions meant that the index needed to be rebuilt as well. There's fewer cities and more geysers now, which is my kind of atlas. There's lots of other physical features that we added in too. We added lots of waterfalls and some more peaks. So now the index is really a comprehensive reference for these spectacular landscapes. And with that, the update was complete. So we launched this book back at the beginning of the summer, and we're excited to see it out in use in the wild, and I'm just now realizing that's still the first edition. So imagine this cover up there. Somehow I got my covers mixed up. But yeah, it was a lot of fun to work on, and I'm eager for my next opportunity to get out there and actually use the book on the ground myself. It's fun to be out there doing the field checking and working on the maps, but it's very satisfying to go back with the updated product like this one, not like that one, in your hand, and you can actually get out there and explore those landscapes again. So thank you so much for being here and for listening. If there's time for questions, I'm happy to answer a few. And if you just want to talk about Yellowstone and Grand Teton later, like, come find me. That's all I want to talk about. And I have a lot of these. So if you want to look at one, or if you just want one, come up here at the end, and there are some for you to take. So please, I don't want to take them back with me. So thank you.
We do have time for questions.
When it came time to revise the atlas, what was some of like you brought it in closer to the parks. What did you base that decision off of? Were you getting feedback what made you think that would be more useful in the next edition?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, there was some feedback that we were responding to, but it was also just to make it a clearer product of what it is. I think probably a lot of people in this room and at other conferences probably know of Greater Yellowstone as an idea, but maybe it's not as common of a concept among the general public. And that if you see that old logo and that old cover, which I didn't mean to have there, on a bookshelf, it might not mean as much to you as if you just see like, oh, it's Yellowstone and Grand Teton National Parks. Like, I know what that is. So we're just trying to like clarify what you're seeing when you see, if all you see is the cover and that's what you're making your decision based off of, we want it to be really clear, like, this is what you're getting.
Okay, thank you, Chaney.
Thank you. Yeah.